in Bangladesh. It's a sort of an assessment of climate change and the institutions related to climate change, addressing climate change in Bangladesh. So I will first request our Executive Director, Dr. Ahsan Mansoor, to please start off by welcoming the guests.
Very good morning to all of you for participating in this webinar. We all know we have let me first welcome our chief guest, Professor Shamsul Alam, Honorable Minister of State, Ministry of Planning. He's always been very kind with us. Whenever we invite him, he's always with us. So we really thank him for his generosity in giving time to us. We have a distinguished panel of experts, and they will analyze things from different angles. We look forward to that very constructive discussions. And we also have representations from World Bank. They will bring their expertise on from global perspective. And of course, at the end of this discussions, we'll hear from our chief guest and closing remarks by the chair, Dr. Zaidi Sattar. We all know that Bangladesh is a particularly vulnerable country, and our vulnerability primarily comes from multiple sources. One is obviously the southern districts are subject to sea level rise, salinity, cyclone, and various other types of hazards. Our upstream, the river erosion is a major problem, and flooding. We have also our areas which are vulnerable to natural calamities, particularly untimely flooding and destruction of cropland. So we deal with those things almost every year, one part or the other. And we have been classified by the global community as one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. And the impact of climate change is already visible in our southern districts. We know that. The statistics shows we don't have the 2020 census data yet, but 2010 data already indicated that the population in southern districts as a whole declined in absolute term, and they became climate refugee. They migrated to urban areas, different big cities and neighboring cities. So that's the beginning of the process. And as you all know that climate change is going to have a much bigger climate refugee problem for Bangladesh, particularly from those areas and the traditional river erosion and loss of land and habitat through that. So we have to prepare ourselves in various ways. But government is committed. We know that government is committed to both COP21 made commitments and and the most recent one in Glasgow. They have enhanced their commitments level also. So government commitment is not in deficit, but there are issues with respect to two particular areas I would definitely highlight. And in today's presentation, the most important area that will be discussed is the institutional mechanism to support the delivery of this climate change related actions of the government. How? And the civil society and all that. How do you do that? What are the institutional mechanisms? How strong are they? What are the weaknesses and so on? So those will be highlighted by our keynote speaker, Dr. Hassan Moinuddin. He's a senior fellow of PRI and a distinguished climate expert. We'll hear from him. He has done a comprehensive job. I looked at his presentation very carefully, and he really touched upon almost all the institutions that will be involved in climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation related issues. And there are significant weaknesses. We all know that. Professor Alam is with us. He also knows that. Even in the Delta Plan area, which he authored as part of the government representative, there are serious institutional challenges as well, which are being addressed, but still far a long way to go. So institutional challenges remain a major problem. And in addition, also highlighted in this paper is the issue of, in my view, another big issue is the issue of mobilizing the necessary finance to do the job. And our resource constraints are very serious, and we know that it's not going to go away unless we really address fundamentally our revenue collection mechanism, the domestic resource mobilization part in particular. Foreign financing will come, but we cannot really count on that 100%. And also, it's not going to be a substitute for our domestic resource mobilization at the public sector level and the engagement of the private sector in delivering some of these projects as under PPP or even pure private initiative. So we have challenges, and the challenges are as amplified in this presentation, mostly will be coming from institutional side. And that's not unique. In Bangladesh, most of our challenges are institutional challenges. So we have to deal with it. I will not go any further. At this point, I will hand it over to Dr. Jani Sattar, who will be conducting the session from now on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan Mansur, for the introduction. I also have a couple of things to say before we start off and inviting our distinguished panelists. Well, we have good news on the growth front today. Bangladesh's GDP recognized by multilateral institutions and analysts as having been not only rapid, but also stable. But the important thing during this 21st century is that growth not only has to be inclusive, but also sustainable. And that is where global warming comes in. And global warming is a reality, and Bangladesh is not shying away from recognizing it and addressing it. And that's where institutions in the country come in. Bangladesh, with only 0.5% of global GDP, contributes a very small part of the global greenhouse gas emissions. Only 0.25% is the current estimate. Still, Bangladesh is committed to exercising restraint, A, in curbing our emissions, and B, in adapting to climate change issues. As Dr. Hassan just mentioned, international experts believe that Bangladesh is one of the top 10 countries vulnerable to climate change. Now, the world's 70 countries that contribute to 90% of global GHG emissions, they have made a commitment to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. But as we all know, and the experts tell us that at the current, with all the commitments, we are unlikely to achieve the cap of 1.5 degrees centigrade by the end of the century. And net zero emission by 2050 is still going to be very challenging. Now, the other thing that is being pointed out is globally, to achieve net zero emissions, you need huge amounts of additional investments from what is being currently done. And that additional investment is being calculated at $3.5 trillion a year globally. That's what is needed. But the important thing is that the technology that is being promoted for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and doing the renewables, that is going to create an estimated 200 million jobs globally, although it also will reduce about 185 million jobs. So on a net basis, it would be, these innovations would be job creating. So that's the good news part. Now, Bangladesh is an LDC and it's not required to make commitments, but it has, as part of its solidarity with the global community. The most recently updated submission, which is titled Nationally Determined Contributions 2021, provides the consistent framework of targets and commitments of the government and the support that the government is going to be providing. And that is why this particular webinar on our institutions is is irrelevant in the context of Bangladesh addressing climate change. There are two challenges that we recognize: the mitigation challenge and the adaptation challenge. On the mitigation part, the focus has to be on these 7 energy and land use systems. 1 is power, 2 is industry, 3 is transportation, 4 buildings, 5 is agriculture, 6 is forestry, and the 7th is waste. And we have assembled in this, the stakeholder consultation, a broad spectrum of officials and participants and participants in this entire climate change adjustment scenario. And you will hear from some of these representatives and panelists who've been addressing some of these activities in some of these sectors. There is, of course, the adaptation challenge that is currently, the government is quite engaged. There's a big, the Delta Plan 2100 is a long-term exercise that has pointed out the amount of investments that will be needed. Something like roughly $2 billion a year will be needed to address climate change. That's a big item. So the study that is being prepared now, Dr. Moinuddin, the senior fellow of PRI, will be making this presentation, which is very comprehensive. And I will let him point out the critical issues that are here. But the important thing is private and public sector must both be involved. NGOs, government organizations, and subnational and national agencies all have to be engaged in addressing the problem of climate change in Bangladesh. So with these few words, let me now start the recognition and invitation process. First, before we go to the keynote presentation, we have very high representation from the multilateral institution that is engaged globally in addressing climate change, the World Bank. And I would like to first of all invite Mr. Abbas Shah, Practice Manager of Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management of the World Bank. He's one of the highest officials of the bank responsible for addressing climate change issues around the world. And here he is. So may I welcome and invite Mr. Abbas Shah, Practice Manager, Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management of the World Bank, to give his few words. Mr. Abbas.
Thank you, Dr. Sattar, and thank you to PRI for inviting us to this very distinguished panel and very interesting event. So I want to begin by acknowledging and thanking the Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Shamsul Alam, Minister of State for Planning. And I also want to acknowledge the distinguished panelists, Mr. Mirza Shaukat Ali, Mr. Anwarul Alam Chaudhry, Dr. Tariq bin Yusuf, and of course, Dr. Sattar as chair. And I also want to acknowledge my World Bank colleagues who are here and all the distinguished guests. So I think I want to build on the excellent opening remarks and just make a few points here. One is that Bangladesh is extremely vulnerable to climate change. That's something that you already know, and I don't need to reinforce. But if you look at the Global Climate Risk Index, Bangladesh is ranked as the world's 7th most climate affected country. Estimated average annual losses to disasters is around $3 billion. So that's about 1 to 2% of GDP. The coastal zone, as was mentioned, is prone to multiple threats: cyclones, storm surges, coastal erosion, saline intrusions. Tropical cyclones is a regular feature, unfortunately, in this part of the world, with at least 75 major cyclones that have impacted the coast over the last 100 years. So this in a way is the bad news, but let me give you some of the good news, which is that Bangladesh really stands out as a model in terms of disaster preparedness and early warning systems. I've worked in the World Bank for over 20 years, and I have always cited Bangladesh as really a model for the world. There's so much that we can learn from what you have done in terms of cyclone preparedness, in terms of the multi-purpose shelters, the early warning systems. And what really fascinates me about the Bangladesh system is that a lot of it is low tech. You know, the early warning system could be as simple as a high school student on a bicycle, on a megaphone, but the system works, and that is really remarkable. And the evidence is in the way the death rates have plummeted. Even when you have super cyclones like Sidr a few years ago, the death rates are extremely low as compared to, say, 40, 50 years ago. So really, Bangladesh is a model for all countries to learn from. Second point I want to make is that the World Bank is really proud of our partnership with Bangladesh on this issue and on all issues related to growth and development. So this year, coincidentally, we'll be celebrating 50 years of partnership between Bangladesh and the World Bank. And we are very, very proud to have been a small part of this journey of Bangladesh on building climate resilience and disaster resilience. As you know, we have multiple projects in this area, the Coastal Embankment Improvement Project. We have the Multipurpose Disaster Shelter Project, the Weather and Climate Services Regional Project, all of which have delivered hundreds of millions of concessional lending to Bangladesh. And we hope to continue and build on this strong partnership. Now, coming to the theme for today, so I wanted to mention that the World Bank has just started a new diagnostic called the Climate Change and Development Report. So this is what we call a core diagnostic. So essentially every country that is a client of the World Bank will have a CCDR. And we are fortunate that Bangladesh is going to be one of the first where we'll be producing a CCDR by the end of this fiscal year, which is June. So by June, we will have the report ready. And this CCIA, the institutional assessment, will be part of that CCDR, we hope, and will feed into the CCDR. The spirit behind the CCDR is that we cannot isolate climate change from development. Climate change has to be mainstreamed into every aspect of the development and growth process. Now, the institutional aspect is obviously critical in this. And one problem, I know that under the National Adaptation Plan, the Ministry of Environment in Bangladesh has a nodal role to play, and that is absolutely fine. But given the scale of the challenge of climate change, this really has to be mainstreamed into every single agency and ministry. Every ministry has to think on how they are going to deal with the risks of climate change. So the Ministry of Roads or Highways needs to think that the roads that they are building today will have a life cycle of, say, 40, 50 years. So you have to plan for the design of a road that is built in a world that is 2 degrees warmer. And that is a completely new paradigm. The last time the world was 2 degrees warmer, there were dinosaurs roaming the planet. So we are entering a whole new world of risks. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of the opportunities as well. As Dr. Sattar mentioned, that there are new areas opening up, there are new types of jobs that will open up. And it is important that we build up the skills so that, that Bangladesh can benefit from these new opportunities. For example, in solar energy, in wind power, in battery storage, and different aspects of manufacturing. So, so let me stop here. And again, I want to thank PRI for their partnership over the years. We are very, very proud to partner with you. You've really produced excellent work over the years. And again, once again, thanks for the opportunity. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jha, Practice Manager of the World Bank. Okay. Thank you for describing Bangladesh as a model for disaster risk management. Yes, but Bangladesh used to be known as a country of natural disasters. No, now no longer. In fact, Bangladesh's model of disaster management is being replicated elsewhere. So thanks for pointing that out. And also thanks for pointing out that climate change and development are now intertwined. You can't think of development without addressing the cross-cutting issue. Climate change is now a cross-cutting issue in development. And Bangladesh has to take note of it. And the important point that you've made is that the job opportunities will be created when we adopt the new technologies in addressing climate change. So that's the good news part of this exercise. Now I think it's time for us to listen to the keynote presentation from Dr. Hassan Moinuddin, a senior fellow of Policy Research Institute. But the important thing is he has a long background in dealing with sustainable development issues in East Asia. It's been, the leading expert on the Mekong Delta, planning framework. And most recently, he was the critical contributor to the stock-taking exercise done for Bangladesh as to where things stand when it comes to climate change and these greenhouse gas emissions and so on and so forth. So without further ado, let me invite Dr. Hassan Moinuddin to make the keynote presentation, which is, as said by Dr. Hassan, so very comprehensive, but I'm sure he'll limit his time to the 25 minutes that is allotted. Your floor, Dr. Moinuddin.
Thank you very much. I'd like to share my screen with you all. I hope you can see the screen now. Before I start off, I would like to address the chief guest, Professor Dr. Shamsul Alam, Minister for Planning, and the chair, Dr. Zaidi Sattar. My condolences on your tragic loss yesterday. Very importantly, we have to look at the two other previously conducted reports. One was on Bangladesh climate change data. We have collected national and international data together. The second was a diagnostics, which has just been mentioned, that a climate change and development report for each country that is cooperating with the World Bank is in the making, and Bangladesh is supposed to be the first one that's coming up. Now, this one currently is about climate change and institutions, which is part of the CCDR. The contents of my presentation today are organized around what has been going around in international circles as an institutional assessment that needs to be conducted for all countries that are looking toward combating climate change. Number one, first pillar is organization, which deals with regulatory framework, mandates, etc. Number two is about planning, which is long, medium, short-term planning, risk vulnerability, etc., including MRV. Three is public finance. This is very important because the public finance management needs to be scrutinized as whether we are all ready for the important challenges that have to be taken up. Number four, very, very important for Bangladesh, subnational governments, state-owned enterprises. What we have done is we have included, in addition to Upazilas, Union Parishads, Poroshavas, city corporations, and SOEs, we have included private sector initiatives and NGO engagement in adaptation. Number five, which is accountability, basically legislative oversight, audit, and etc. So I'll come to that in more detail later. Organization. Now, in the regulatory framework, the overarching policy framework for Bangladesh is Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, which is shortly known as Bcc Sap. I apologize for all the abbreviations that will come up here. This was initiated early in 2008, then revised in 2009. This is currently the basic policy framework. Bangladesh is yet to enact a climate change law. It might be important to discuss whether it is necessary or not. However, nationally, government of Bangladesh has put in place renewable energy policy, climate change trust act with the fund, country action plan for clean cook stoves, national action plan for reducing short-lived climate pollutants, energy efficiency and conservation master plan, and of course, the most important recent one, which is the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan with a lot of targets in there. On the right side of the screen, you have a huge, list of actions that actually the 2009 BCC SAP contains. I won't go into all of them here. What is very important, however, to understand that internationally, Bangladesh has revised its commitments to a reduction of so-called voluntary or unconditional commitments of 27.56 million CO2 ton equivalent of GHG emissions. Here you can see it with my cursor on the right side. In addition, what it has done is it has actually has conditional emissions as well, which are around here. So over 61.9 million tons. This is very important, even as an LDC, which actually does not require to have commitments made in this order. I would like to go on to say that MOEFCC has been given a lead role. It follows up on MRV. It also galvanizes all the institutions to produce important and relevant reports. However, on the global practice side, over 17 European countries, as well as many Asian countries, have embarked on enacting climate change laws. In fact, one of the countries, or rather two, Germany and Netherlands, have been challenged in the court as their targets were too low. I think this might need a little bit more discussion whether Bangladesh needs a Climate Change Act. Let's go on to the next one. The NDC, Nationally Determined Contributions, has, as well as the NAP, National Adaptation Program or Plan, which will be coming out very soon, has an advisory committee. The advisory committee is the highest body that discusses what needs to be done and put forward to the Prime Minister's office. And finally, it is sent to the UNFCCC. The NDC-NAP coordination is the main focal point with the UNFCCC, where it acts as a secretariat for the country. And that is that the ministries in three broad secretaries, power, transport, and industry, have sectoral working groups. We have mandates to establish these technical advice and develop sectoral regulation. And in financial year 20, out of 58.11% of the total national budget against 25 line ministries, and this is important, the 25 line ministries, 7.8% of the budget was climate relevant. However, it is a very small amount currently known as contribution towards climate change from GOB resources. So 0.8% of GDP is approximately going there. I will do a little bit more details in how much of GDP contribution and how much externally. In the assessment, we come to the conclusion there may be a need to have a high-level secretary at the Prime Minister's office to lead, coordinate, and review progress annually and report directly to the PM. This is currently not very clear in the structure that I have in front of me. And of course, developing an annual scorecard is very important by ministry so that we understand how targets are linked to the international commitments that Bangladesh has made. Now, from the 25, I have just chosen a selection here to explain a bit of what is the annual budget allocation. You see, if you look at roads and highways, they're only getting 0.77% of their total budget as climate relevant. So the rest of 99% is basically on regular conventional work. You look here, especially on water resources, which is extremely important for Bangladesh, 32%, a third practically is going towards climate relevant activities for the budget year. This shows us in a nutshell what every one of these 25 ministries are getting. And we are looking at a stage where none of the ministries and governments appear to have included climate change in their performance targets. If I look at their annual reports, or let us go back to their websites, none of them have very clearly indicated what are their performance targets over the years up to 2030, or even let us say, what are the performance targets for financial year that is currently in place. We have also seen that if you look at the planning pillar, countries do need a long-term assessment. And we have here initiatives of Bangladesh, such as it has embraced quite early the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. It has prepared investment plan for the environment, forestry, climate change, a roadmap and action plan for implementing the NDC in 2018. Here are the 3 sectors. The government has adopted a 5-year comprehensive public financial management performance. And of course, there have been various developments in the Ministry of Finance on budget and accounting systems, etc. The current scenario, however, is the long-term plan that Bangladesh has is called the Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100. It is quite comprehensive. It will need a 2.5% GDP investment. It has over 80 projects of the plan which are to be implemented, and they are roughly estimating a $2 billion assistance required to implement. It is basically an infrastructure climate adaptation plan. What we do, however, require is that currently Bangladesh is only able to mobilize 0.5% of the GDP. So we are still far away from actually being financially able to have a full-fledged implementation started. But Bangladesh is doing a lot still. Sweden's long-term strategy for reducing greenhouse gases is an example. This long-term strategy basically puts in place what Bangladesh has submitted to UNFCCC, and it might be interesting to see if that is our long-term for GHG emission reduction, plus to add adaptation targets, which are important. Medium term, I might be saying something that Professor Alam may not agree with, but from an economic point of view, medium and long term have a different connotation. From a climate change point of view, long term is really 100 years. When we talk about medium, it's actually 2050. And what we are looking at here are the Prospective Plan 2041. I might call that a medium plan for Bangladesh. Economists might call it maybe a medium to long term. This is very important because we are looking at integrating environmental costs into the economic framework. We are looking at implementing Delta Plan, reducing air and water pollution, adopting green tax on fossil fuel consumption, preventing surface water pollution, and lowering vulnerabilities of districts to climate change and natural disasters. The short term, we are looking at an 8th 5-year plan. We are already into 2022 now of that 8th 5-year plan. And what we are seeing here are challenges of budget allocation and implementation processes, which are not always reflected by ministries and local governments, the overall harmonization and implementation, and capacity constraints of the lead ministry of environment, forest, and climate change. Expectation that agriculture productivity will be increased, and along with it, sustainability of agriculture production. I will explain a little bit later some of the technologies that are currently being used in rural areas. As far as the BCC SAP is concerned, the main point is that the BCC SAP is being implemented, and in the allocations, they are linked to the 25 ministries that are receiving budget allocations. We have climate and gender related policy documents that are in place. Non-government and private sector need to generate public investment besides government, and they are doing it. I will give you a few examples of that. It is important to establish strong linkages between national level and subnational level expenditures, and through the central budgeting system. And we must link local government level plans to ADPs and annual budgets. What is now important is to look at the public financial management system. Climate policies and strategies have been included in the budget circular and the medium-term budgetary framework. Two important policy documents have included climate change, which are medium-term macroeconomic policy statements and the Bangladesh Economic Review. In practice, the objective of the BCC SAP, as I have already said, integrate climate change issues. In 2021 financial year, MOF made allocations to also the BCC Trust Fund, and the Trust Fund gets additional allocations to the 25 ministries that are receiving funds. And the government has created this fund in 2009 and has already submitted a large amount of its own resources to the trust fund. Now, social protection and public spending is very important. As you know, Bangladesh is ravaged by cyclones and flooding every year, and a lot of funding that goes to it are on the social spending, relief, rehabilitation, and taking care of the vulnerable groups. We have 7 to 8% of the annual budgets, with roughly 25% coming from ODA sources. 58.4 million people have benefited under the scheme in 2019 and 20. However, it is necessary that we differentiate between national disaster-related support and other social security spending. Let us look a little bit more in details about transparency and accountability. Now, there is a climate public finance tracking system that has been emerging from a project with the Ministry of Finance, and climate relevance has been assigned. We have also the PEFA, which is a public expenditure and financial accountability framework, and it has several indicators here with dimensions. I am just showing you 14 main indicators that are in vogue, and I am happy to say that indicative PEFA status in Bangladesh shows budget alignment with climate change strategies, which is modifications with the BCC SAP, tracking climate-related expenditure, and improved climate public finance tracking methodology, and budget circular, which is in place, and legislative scrutiny, which takes place through the Committee on Public Accounts, as well as several other things that are happening. Of course, there are many areas that need to be improved on the PEFA, but Bangladesh is going quite well along the way. And I would say that a few more years, we will have a very good system in place. So the status of implementation currently in our assessment is not the conducting of a full-fledged PEFA assessment, but we have come to the conclusion that forming a vertical link between national line ministries and union parishads is extremely important. This can be done through budget and sub-budget codes, and this will align the union parishad expenditures as well as their planning and budget targets together with national plans and targets. Reporting on an annual basis is very important. Skills upgrading, functional literacy is important, and R&D. Now, infrastructure governance and asset management, the roles of LGED and RHD are significant. LGED has a major role in rural areas on local government maintenance as well as infrastructure investments. Municipalities rely on LGED to make decisions on assets, and climate change risks and policy objectives need to be mainstream. They are not currently across core infrastructure governance processes, especially in investments. There is no very clear framework when investments are planned and implemented that there needs to be a maintenance aspect as well. Above all, I would like to say that the government procurement system has not yet come into force with environmental and climate change procurement. And in the public procurement, green and climate-informed procurement initiatives are absent. But I must laud the current CPTU, Central Procurement Technical Unit. It has set up an excellent website. It has got citizens charter. It allows the public to follow, and most probably it will follow contracts online, perhaps even in real time in the future, which is currently being worked on. So if anybody needs to have a look at that, they can immediately see the achievements of the CPTU here. We hope that in the future, green procurement will be also coming on stream. Climate finance, as I said, BCCTF has undertaken so far 800 projects with nearly $500 million of investment. Work is currently undergoing with GCF. GCF is funding quite a lot of projects in Bangladesh now. And the Bangladesh Coastal Climate Resilient Infrastructure Project with the CIF, CIF, UNRED, GEF, all these need to be mentioned here. One important point, however, is carbon pricing and revenue. There was an attempt to create something like this, and it got dislodged, perhaps due to political pressures, etc., when climate carbon pricing would have created perhaps more undue stress on fuels, etc. What are the gaps and challenges? Mitigation, climate finance is needed for mitigation. We do not see much large-scale investments in the industrial sector right now. Adaptation, Bangladesh lacks adaptation resources. It's doing its best it can. The promise of $100 billion a year has not materialized. We know that the pandemic has also affected many developed countries, and this may be a bit of a, let us say, dream that has gone by until further growth is realized. Now, subnational governments, what we did was we looked at on subnational governments, 2 cities, Dhaka and Chittagong, called Chattogram nowadays. We have looked at other local government initiatives like Logic and community-based adaptation and at union and parishad levels. We looked at state-owned enterprises. These are some of them. Bangladesh Power Development Board stands out very well. I will explain why. We have government-owned private sector companies. These are 100% government-owned. ITCOL stands out very well because it has a section on renewable energy investment. Private sector, we have looked at LEED certified garment factories, the BGMEA, the BKMEA, Plummy Fashions as one example, and Pran Foods in agriculture. And finally, non-government organizations which are very famous around the world, BRAC, for instance, RDRS, which have both been working since 1972, and Kodak, and I saw some of our participants are attending. Now, here's one example, very briefly. BDP Power Development Board just put on stream a 100-megawatt solar field near Port Mongla, not only because it's a renewable energy that's going on to grid, but rather it is built in an area which was planned for a coal plant on the site. And those plans were shelved because of the proximity to Sundarbans, and the solar power plant has been put in place. And this is a great achievement for Bangladesh to be able to go back on certain policy decisions and nevertheless allow sustainable renewable energy to take place. The target is 40% till year 2041. Let us see how perhaps later the progress is tracked. This is a very important website from this Sustainable Renewable Energies Development Authority. It always tracks how much has been achieved and installed capacity. It tells us off-grid and on-grid and the total currently. I'm sure here a few more important aspects will be added as we go along. Summary assessment, SOEs in Bangladesh have a crucial role still, not all of them, but still some have a role to play. It is important for SOEs like Power Development Board, Water Development Board, etc., and Agriculture Corporation to explicitly state climate relevant vision and mission statements, to set goals and targets, and report accordingly by linking them to national level targets. Government-owned private sectors need to gear up also on climate-related activities. ITCOL is the only one doing it so far. In the private sector, I must laud the ready-made garment industry and other NGOs who are doing DRR work and adaptation work. It is worth considering. I'm just putting it in the room. It is worth considering whether GOB should be outsourcing some of its plans and investments to these entities. Upazila Union Parishad, we find that the Upazila Union Parishad budget preparation and expenditures are not including climate planning and adaptation activities, except in projects which are supported by NGOs or supported by government projects that are being funded externally. And they have given very good examples of how budget planning as well as expenditures could be included. What we therefore propose are codes and subcodes from the Ministry of Finance to link it vertically. We are also looking at tracking these expenditures, which should be put in place. Our suggestion here after the assessment is that perhaps block grants that are carried over from financial year to financial year might be a better way of taking care of infrastructure climate works. This is particularly important in forestry because as budgets are approved and funds are released, sometimes, seedlings are not available, people are not there, there are delays. So these issues really need to be looked at. On city corporations, I must say, indeed, hardly any of the city corporations have a major climate target theme. They do not have it in the mission and vision statements. However, they have a history of water and sewage, and they have been dealing with that for some time. I'm sure our esteemed panelist will tell us something about that from Dhaka North. What is very important is we went to some of a detailed look at the union parishads in Upazilas, in Kurigram, and in Teknaf. And there are two different scenarios. The one here is dealing with 3 minutes. Dealing with very detailed adaptation projects. The other one is dealing more with indigenous forest resources. So here are some of the aspects. This is raised plinths. You see the flooding there. Here is a multi-hazard zone map that SEGIS has done, which is something that could be done similarly for others. Here are some very small examples of projects that are doing adaptation. And finally, one of the most important, this hospital has been given the world's best building award by the Royal Institute of Architects. There is LEED. LEED is leadership in energy and design. This has several indicators. We have 39 platinum, 84 gold, and 10 silver certified RNG factories in Bangladesh. Bangladesh also has buildings in Dhaka, which are going for a greener environment. These are also LEED certified, platinum and gold. We have 9 out of the world's top 10 green garment factories, 500 more factories online, and so on and so forth. BGME is very important because it is doing decarbonization by signing several important agreements. Now, finally, accountability, which is very important. Access to information. I fear I cannot go to one climate portal and say, what is our data currently? What have we achieved in the last year? What are our future targets? That would be very important. Stakeholder engagement. I am sure that the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change is doing stakeholder engagement. However, it is not clear what kind of instruments they are using, etc. Independent expert advice. It might be useful to put up an independent expert advice roster where very important lead, eminent scientists, etc. are involved. They may be called upon, they may not be, but a roster is important to see. Legislative body. It is very important to know whether reports are coming out of oversight of the expenditure. Audit. In practice, climate performance audits are falling short. There is a lack of resources with the OCAG. we are recommending that they get these resources and judicially review. This is the most important point. Bangladesh has established a body of case law that allows the locus standi of individuals, institutions, associations that actually challenge the government or other public private sector actors in bringing forward issues of environment and climate change. I would like to stop here now by saying, just in conclusion, regulatory framework I have mentioned, national line ministries and agencies need to be aligned. Subnational levels of governance, they need to be aligned in the budget. Public expenditure, financial accountability, PEFA would be very important to follow up. Private sector and NGOs have demonstrated capabilities, transparency, audit, accountability. Finally, I request all stakeholders at this meeting and others who wish to make contributions or provide feedback to submit these to PRI in writing. I thank you for your patience and time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Moinuddin, for a very comprehensive presentation. I think one of the early comprehensive presentations on the state of institutions, private, public, NGOs, state-owned enterprises, all of them actively getting into this act of addressing climate change in their regular activities. So this is, it's difficult to pinpoint any one, but I could see that you ended with this picture of the award for the best building by the Institute of Royal Architecture. And that's a big achievement for a remotely set up hospital in, I think it is in Jessore. And you've also said our leading industrial sector, garments, they're now some of the top, green factories in the world. That's remarkable. So we are not just, expanding exports by 30-40% this year, but they're also doing, making progress in becoming sustainable factories, green factories. Okay. So as you have mentioned, the lead institution on behalf of the government happens to be the Ministry of Environment, Forests, and now climate change is part of the name of the ministry, MOEFCC. So what we should do now, I think, after your presentation, ideally we should listen to Mr. Mirza Shaukat Ali, who is the point person in that important ministry. He is the director of climate change and international convention. So he's the interlocutor between the government and the UNFCCC and the other international organizations dealing with climate change. Mr. Shaukat Ali, are you ready to share your views with the members here?
Thank you, sir, and thank you for giving me the floor. Distinguished Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Shamsul Alam, Honorable Minister of State, Ministry of Planning, Dr. Jaidi Sattar, Chairman, Policy Research Institute, Dr. Ahsan Ace Mansoor, Executive Director, PRI, Mr. Abbas Jah, Practice Manager, Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management, World Bank, and my appreciation to Dr. Hassan Moinuddin for a very comprehensive presentation. And also my greetings to the participants who have joined virtually to this distinguished gathering. Having said that, I just, sir, unfortunately, I have got this presentation an hour before, so it was difficult for me to go through it in detail. But I have some points on different slides. So I will try to share those with you. In slide regulatory framework, where you have mentioned MUSIP Climate Prosperity Plan, Decade 2030, So just want to mention here that this was actually presented by our Honorable Prime Minister when she was in COP26 in this Climate Vulnerable Forum. However, this document is actually evaluated by the cabinet, and they have given some observation. Accordingly, this is being revised, and under the chairmanship of our Secretary Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, we are regularly meeting, and we are also conducting several. Already we have met twice in interministerial meeting. We are going to update this. And I just want to mention that the time frame from 2020 to 2030 has been requested by the cabinet committee to increase this to 2041. So that is one point I wanted to mention. On legal basis that you mentioned about global practice and recommendation, where you have mentioned that Bangladesh doesn't have a National Climate Change Act. Certainly, we don't have a Climate Change Act, but we have discussed this issue within the ministries. But we have the understanding that we have adequate documents to guide our adaptation and mitigation initiatives. Like we have our NAPA, National Adaptation Program of Action, which we prepared in 2005 and updated in 2009. And we have Bcc Sap, and we have NDC in 2015, and then updated this in 2021. So adequate documents to guide our activities towards climate resilience. So in that perspective, we don't feel that preparing an act is a necessity, an immediate necessity, but certainly we discussed maybe for giving a legal framework that you mentioned, we can really prepare that. You have also mentioned about the MRV issue here. I just want to mention here that we haven't actually established any MRV platform here yet, monitoring, reporting, and verification, because this is an evolving concept, and really it's difficult to actually track the progress of different initiatives. So we, under biennial update report that we are preparing at the moment, I'm the project director of the project, and also capacity building initiative on transparency. Both the projects are under UNFCCC. We are trying to develop an MRV system for tracking mitigation and as well as adaptation activities in the country. In case of you lightly mentioned that there is a already there is a institutional framework. We have already discussed about this NDC NAP framework to look after climate mitigation and adaptation issues. And I just want to mention here that to track the progress of like mitigation initiatives that we have prepared the NDC. You know, UNFCCC process will regularly update the NDCs, because we have to achieve this 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, 2 degree, or if possible 1.5 degree goal. That's why regularly we have to update this, and we have to actually submit these documents to some review committee. They will review the progress, and we might be held accountable. All this, although we are now LDC country, we don't have any responsibility, a legal obligation. But in the near future, when we will graduate from LDC status, certainly we will have obligations. So Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change has already formed 2 committees to track the progress, because you know we have developed this NDC with lots of consultation with relevant ministries. So to track the progress, we shall regularly meet and ensure that this progress is achieved. You have mentioned thinking long-term issues. I will also try to relate this global practice in Sweden. You know, we have to consider that Bangladesh is an LDC country, and we will graduate on 2024. So our priority or obligation will not match that with the European Union. You have mentioned the European Union's obligation of they will achieve 2040, 2050 net zero. Many countries will. for Bangladesh, as an LDC or we will be becoming a developing country, we haven't yet decided whether our net zero will be 2050, because without developing or exercising a long-term low emission development strategy, this is too difficult to predict which year will be the appropriate year for Bangladesh to achieve net zero status. So, China has mentioned during this COP26 that they will achieve net zero by 2060. India has mentioned they will achieve net zero in 2065. Mr. Narendra Modi has mentioned this in his speech, that they will achieve this in 2065. So what we are doing at the moment, with Japan, Ministry of Environment, Japan, we have taken an initiative to develop a long-term emission strategy, and already there is an initial exchange of letters within our two ministries, and we are going to develop a long-term low emission development strategy within the next 2 years, and hopefully after this long-term low emission development strategy and with consultation with relevant ministries, we shall be able to ascertain which year our long-term net zero target year will be. And I also want to mention that our priority will not match with Sweden. So I would prefer here that if you had mentioned some of the practices of some developing countries, that could be more appropriate here. In public financial management, you have mentioned that there are some challenges in disbursement of funds from Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund, certainly initially there were some challenges, but we have prepared a guidelines for allocation of resources, how the resources should be allocated and who will be prioritized. So these guidelines has been prepared, and I was one of the member of that committee for preparing the guidelines, and it was chaired by Dr. Ainul Nishat. So hopefully those kind of challenges will be overcome. And certainly there are two committees. One is a technical committee. I'm also a member of the technical committee, and there is a trustee board which is headed by various ministers. So we try to scrutiny all the projects, and accordingly we try to disburse funds, and we try to ensure that resources are allocated appropriately to respective ministries with requirements or priorities. In case of climate finance, you have also mentioned that there are gaps and challenges, and you have mentioned about the Green Climate Fund. You have mentioned there is no single document about the climate finance. Certainly, you have rightly mentioned we haven't succeeded in preparing any single document, but there are various documents. One document is, I can mention, Bangladesh country program to GCF, which was prepared in 2018. So Economic Relations Division, along with relevant ministries, has developed a country program where we have incorporated all the relevant projects and programs that we are going to submit to Green Climate Fund in the future. And there are 11 projects from the Ministry or Department of Environment was incorporated as well. So there is a document, and also we are working in NAP preparation. We are already in the final stage of a NAP preparation. We have already got the zero draft of the NAP. Here is the zero draft of the NAP. We have just got this last week. So in the NAP, we are also trying to identify what ministries will require what amount of resources. So initially, we have incorporated those, and we shall try to update this further in the future. About this Bangladesh Power Development Power Purchase Agreement, you have mentioned here that 40% of the electricity from renewable will be coming in 2041. According to the renewable energy policy and other policies of the Power Division or Power Development Board or SREDA, actually this target is 10%. This is actually we considered in our Muzib Climate Prosperity Plan, but there is ongoing discussion with SREDA power division to finalize this, I mean, the amount, I mean, the percentage, because according to power division, achieving renewable energy requirement from renewable energy is too high, 40% is too high. So maybe that will be reduced to a certain amount. So
Thank you. Very good.
I have one more points here. You mentioned that we work with different stakeholders, but whether adequate consultation is being done, you have requested also to involve experts who has credible knowledge in climate change. So I just want to mention that we already at the final stage of NAP formulation, and we have a lot of series of consultation at local, district and divisional levels and national levels. We have discussed with private sector, youth organization, a BCC representative was here, and sectoral agencies certainly was here. We have group discussions. We have discussed with development partners, NGOs, civil societies. So hopefully most of them was incorporated. Maybe one or two experts was left. We are sorry for that. In the future, we will try to incorporate further experts so that no one is left behind. So these were the points from my side, and thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the floor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Our profound gratitude to you for really laying down all the work that has been done. I think our confidence is now at a higher level, knowing that the government is not only committed to addressing climate change and making NDC commitment, but there's a lot of activity going on, and we're glad to know that there's much more than what we thought was happening. So this is great news. Thank you very much for your time and your presentation. Excellent presentation. Thank you. May I now move to one of the most prolific spokesperson of the ready-made garment industry, Mr. Anwarul Alam Chaudhry Pervez, who's the former president of the BGMEA, now the president of Bangladesh Chamber of Industries. I'm sure he's going to tell us, the readiness, the compliance that is going on in terms of environmental requirements. And we are being told that something like 155 LEED certified factories now exist in the garment industry, and the top 10 green factories are here in Bangladesh. So please, Mr. Anwarul Alam Chaudhry Pervez, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Jadi Sattar Bhai, Honorable Chair, and Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Shamsul Alam Bhai, Honorable State Minister of Planning and distinguished guests. And I must give a thanks to the keynote speaker, Mr. Dr. Hassan Moinuddin, for his comprehensive presentations, and also in return, the presentation given by Mr. Mirza Shaukat Ali, the preparations what Bangladesh are doing. And actually, I've been enlightened to know both the sides. So before I start with, I think that I must say one of the things that Bangladesh, basically, when I'm seeing the industry perspective and the country itself, basically we are, what shall I say? It's a green country in a sense. Because if you look the industry-wise, what we have developed, we have so far developed only the garments industry and some of the textile industry. And we didn't manufacture, we don't have enough chemical industry or manufacturing machinery industry so that we can dispose a lot of chemicals, or emission, so-called carbon dioxide emissions in the air. So in a industry side, we are in a very initial stage. So I say that Bangladesh, in that respect, is a virgin nation and a clean country. But when everybody talks about the global warming, global changes, it is a curse for us because we are the victim of the developed nation. Since the first industrial revolutions have started in 1947 by the hydraulic engine, and later on, 1870, inventions of the electricity. So because of that, the coal plant or the lot of other industry, they are creating a lot of emissions, and ultimately we can see the effect is a lot. The rising of the water level, we are in a delta position, so the water, we have been flooded, cyclone, thunderstorm, everything we have been facing. And unfortunately, the speaker have clearly mentioned that Bangladesh disaster management, because of it probably, disaster management, we are one of the champion in the world. But on the other side, it is also important that it is appreciated by the globally, but when it comes with the fund, they are not being come forward in that respect. That's what has been worrying. Because Bangladesh people's mindset is always been positive. We are always been positive. Whatever we learn, we try to get into it, fix it immediately. No matter whether it is a government side is a policy, and the private sector, we are always been very proactive and we don't look behind, but we believe that we learned it and we have to implement it. That is our strategy, or that is our commitment towards our nations, and that's how we are doing. But when the pollutions, or everybody talks about the carbon dioxide emission or methane, we can see that without the investment also, with some sort of the government policy, which need to be addressed, I think, can be help a lot. For example, we can see air pollution in Bangladesh, we are losing 1% of the GDP. And when I look into it, why it is, I can see that big planes, they also contribute 38% of the micro pollution, motor vehicle, road dust, solid dust, metal smelters, all those things. And today the government is also trying to be, in order to stop this trafficking, they are trying to go with a public transport systems. Like we can see the metro is coming. Probably it will also reduce. But the trafficking systems in Dhaka is too much. And I don't know that how it's going to be addressed also. That need to be addressed very much. It is like the buses. Public bus can also be the alternative to reduce the transport systems in the road. Those kind of things, small things, can also help us to change the whole scenario. Because already, Jahidi Sattar Bhai, you have already mentioned that we are emitting only 0.25% micron, in a sense, which is nothing, and it then clearly mentions. But with a small steps, like the city, Dhaka city, we have been living about 31, in Dhaka city itself is a congested, 31.9% is a, people are living in Dhaka city. And Dhaka, Chittagong together, they have said that the statistics say that about more than close to a almost like, about 35 million people are living in those regions. So on the other hand, when we look into the Purvachal, it starts the development of the Purvachal itself is started more than 20 years and still it's not been workable. We have to address those commitments. Dhaka, Chittagong alone cannot do that. We need a peri-urban development, gradually. Tongi or the Gazipur is not too far, but there is no township it was not even developed. So people are living in city and they are going, the factory are in the Gazipur or Ashulia, all the managers, they live in Dhaka and then they go over there. But if there was a good schools, good playground, good community, then people are gonna be live over there. And the industry, Dhaka, Chittagong, together, the industry percentage is 80% industry are located only in these two districts. And it has to be decentralized. And those kind of things, I think that on those, the people like you should have a prize, and then we can save, I mean, a lot of these trafficking systems or the living or clean air, you know, all those things. I think that we can address it without any without an investment, less investment. Otherwise, because Bangladesh, we have a land crisis also. If you can see that we talk about the alternative renewable energy, and we can see that solar is one of the biggest things, but we cannot afford to provide the land for it. And we have a limited number of land. And the statistics says by 2050, 17% coastline will be underwater, displaced 30 million, and loss of GDP is 2.5%. And in 2030, we will lose the land is about 3% and submerge 6% underwater. In 2080, if the 4 degrees Celsius increase 60 centimeter, water level will increase and 13% land we will lose. And we have to accept it because we can see worldwide the attitude of the developed nations. They talk about reducing emission, but they are not really firm to reduce, to stop their energy, to stop the pollutions by stopping some of the industries where it creates more. They started Kyoto since when? Even if Trump has stopped it, the discussions, now the Biden have started. So what they are saying, even in 2020, if you look, 6 prescriptions is come: health and green recovery, nature, food systems, sustainable infrastructure, clean energy, cities, clean energy and the cities, and stopping pollution. So what we can see that even these climate changes, we are in a vulnerable, we are not losing the land, we are also vulnerable on the change of seasons. The food crops growth will be another big disaster for the whole world and for us. Anyway, Bangladesh, I can see from our Prime Minister's commitment, she is very firm, and whatever she said it, she meant it, and she tried to be pushed forward about it. That we can see, and we are very much hopeful, but what she needs is a support from us, some of the guidelines that what would be the better for the nations in order to address those things. That's what actually she is waiting for. If you look worldwide, let's come back with our textiles sectors, textile and the garment sectors, and the participations of the entrepreneurs, you know, in this sector. Fashion industry, they already talk about, and the statistics says that one t-shirt takes 2,700 liters of water. And in Bangladesh, our Indian textile sector discharges 1.5 crore liter of water. That is 1 ton fabrics dyeing and finishing discharges 200 tons of wastewater. But unfortunately, and for manufacturing one t-shirt, required quantity of cotton 20,000 to grow the cotton for using one t-shirt, 20,000 liter of water it needs. And out of global required quantity of water, 20% are utilized for fashion industry. 20%, you know, globally, the whatever garments we are producing, 20% are utilizing the water, what is consuming worldwide is for the fashion industry only. Besides that, it contributes hazardous by using energy, wastewater, air pollution, soil pollution. And how? UK alone, the statistics says 114 million of garments they dispose every year. And out of that, 73% they destroy by fire or fill up in lowland. 12% used as matrix cleaning and 1% are reused. But in Germany, they recycle 50% and make it reuse. Recycle it 50% and then they make it reuse. In UK, it's only 1%.
Thank you, Mr. Chaudhary. One more minute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So in global, all those informations, global textile contribute 20% wastewater, apparel industry emits 10% carbon dioxide, cleaning farming is responsible, even the cotton farming is responsible for 24% insecticide and 11% pesticide. So altogether, we can see that this waste, as they decompose, release methane, which is significant contributor to the global warming. And when all those discussions comes in our sector, we are becoming feel responsible. So what I mean, awareness is very important. And this information, when they give it to us, we take immediately the steps. And today, if you see, not a single, you are seeing that there is a lead industry, right? 157. It is this 157 lead industry is not the enough, or it's not the only thing the industry has been taken initiative. Besides that, we are trying to take over zero discharge water, how to reuse, recycle the steam, and saving the energy. We are working on this, all the industry, not only the garments, even a textile industry. How to reduce the wastage and recycle those wastages comes from the leftover of the fabrics as well as of the yarn, we are reusing it now. So recycle yarn, recycle fabrics which are not, discharging any emission or using any water, we are just doing it. In denim industry, you'll be surprised that now we are trying to use a system to reduce the wash, because every denim garments, we need a wash, which used to take 150 liter per denim to wash. Today, it takes only 80 liter by using the technological method, by laser system. So
Thank you, sir.
Steps we are taking over, and we are also being concerned by using the LED lights, by reducing even a fan electric consumption, whatever we are using, we are even calculating that. We are trying to reduce that portions also. So even a use of chemical, how to reduce the use of chemical, those kind of things, this industry, textile and garments industry are addressing very much. And our target is by next 2050, we want to reduce at least 70% what we are doing today, the discharge of waters with the carbon dioxide.
So that's important information. Thank you.
And finally, I'd just like to say that I think this kind of seminar is always very good. And one of the things is important that to develop the awareness. Bangladesh people mindset as such, as long as we know, we understand, we really try to address it. We can see on a bus, people are not on a queue to enter into the bus. But those who have implemented it, I have seen even today, some of the bus stoppages, people are on the queue. So it's not that we don't want it to follow it. You have to make them understand and implement those measures. And only then I think Bangladesh can go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alam Chaudhary, for your very comprehensive presentation on the industrial sector, the garment sector in particular, and some very useful information you have given us. Thank you so much for your time and presentation. Now, may I invite Dr. Tariq bin Yusuf, who has spent over 30 years with the Dhaka City Corporation, and he's a specialist on waste management. He's the additional chief engineer and a waste management expert at the Dhaka North City Corporation. And waste is the one that produces, 100% of methane gas comes out of waste. So that's a very dangerous, sector which needs to be, controlled. And I'm told that reducing methane gas is one of the low-hanging fruits that we have in the climate change activities. So Dr. Tariq bin Yusuf, we are eagerly waiting to listen to you. You're the practitioner, you have practical experience in managing waste. So tell us how you are handling this climate change challenge. Over to you.
Thank you for inviting and arranging this seminar, the climate change and preparedness of the institutions. And it's a very timely, the event, I will say. And at the same time, the presentation that I've heard is a very comprehensive and give us a guidance that how we need to move forward, as well as very good deliberation from the national level, Shaukat, as well as from the private sector, Mr. Anwar Alam Chaudhary. I'm delighted to know many things from your side. Now I will come to the sub-national authority. It's okay. How we are thinking based on our, preparedness, knowledge, and something like that. It's okay. First thing is that I will give more emphasis on the readiness of the local authorities. We need to know the weaknesses as well as their knowledge, capacity, and skill. Because we have, the good policy and the regulatory documents like the NDC, we have the 5-year plan, NAPA. So it's a very excellent document, but the main problem is that from the local authority side, we have lack of knowledge, understanding. It's okay. At the same time, that how we are, as it's a national document, and we need to think of how it will be mainstream, our activities. So first thing is that, we need to have a understanding of the importance of the greenhouse gas inventory. We have a national greenhouse gas inventory, but every year we need to report to the CDP that how we are reducing the greenhouse gas. So as you will be glad to know that the Dhaka North City Corporation is now leading the C40. Our mayor is the vice chair of the South and West Asia. And he is also the task force co-leader of climate migration. So we are very in line with this climate change. And so far, what we did that I will need to explain. That is with the support of UNDR, we have prepared the DRR and CCA strategy and action plan for Dhaka City. And also for both the Dhaka North and South City Corporation, we have prepared the greenhouse gas emission inventory for the city, considering the stationary energy, transport, and waste sector. And now we are preparing the climate action plan for the city. So these are the base document, and based on that, we'll have to be moved forward. So what is needed from the city corporation side is that they need a technical support and guidance, that how they will move forward and mainstreaming their activities on the climate change issue. So this is from our side that we are working on it, as well as you see that in the waste sector, you know that is a very challenging sector still. What the city corporations, including the Purosabhas, they are doing just only the waste collection and disposal, but it's not considering the, you see, the recycling, recovery, as well as the circular economy issue. So yes, we have also very recently, you see, we have got the solid waste management rules in 2022. It's a very important as well as guiding document for the city corporation and municipalities, that how they will move forward with their waste management, where you see the climate change issues, the circular economy issues, the 3R issues. It's a very well spelled out. So what is needed from the local authority, that they will have to build up their capacity, they will have to implement their plan in line with the national government plan and policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tariq, for giving us an idea of what the city corporation is doing. And the challenge is therefore developing this circular economy as part of the waste management. But there's also this other challenge of curbing the emission of methane gas, and that needs, and as you mentioned, you need technical guidance in doing that. And I'm sure webinars like this will provide that sort of information. And I think most importantly, I think you do need technical guidance for addressing the methane origination. Thank you very much. Now we're going to this is by invitation to an expert who has been involved in innovative agriculture on part of the adaptation, methodology in the agriculture sector, where they are using innovative, rice production to cope with the rising water level. So we'd like to hear from Mr. Mamunur Rashid, Senior Agricultural Coordinator, Climate Change and Environment of RDRS. RDRS is the Rangpur Dinajpur Rural Services. It's an NGO, a well-known NGO in the northwestern part of Bangladesh. So Mr. Mamunur Rashid, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir, for giving the opportunity to talk with these issues. Good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum. Actually, I'm not an expert, I'm a practitioner. You can say I'm an agriculture extension worker. I'm over the 18 years, so I'm working in the Rangpur region, and this region is actually more vulnerable to climate because Rangpur is situated in the Tista and Brahmaputra river basin. So people are well recognized that the Bangladesh is more vulnerable countries, and that's why the climate induced disaster is day by day is increasing, and also with this frequency. Particularly in the northern areas, we are experiencing the every year flood with the varying intensity and magnitude. And in the last 2020 is 4 to 5 times the flood is happened in these areas. So as a civil society organization, as a agriculture extension worker, what we are doing in the ground level. So we're trying to increase the people's communities awareness and perception about the climate change, because this is the reality. So people now are aware, they are understand clearly climate is changing because the rainfall pattern is changing, flood times and frequent flooding is happening, And now is a long time the cold spell is happening. This is not new, but the length of this, the cold spell is challenging for people. So that's where we're very closely working with the government institution, DAE, BRI, BARI, and also the IRI to promote these, the new technologies, newly developed the varieties. So we have a good number of these stress tolerance varieties, thankful to the governments and also the BRI scientists, they are developed. But we already introduced these types of varieties, the submergent varieties in the flood prone areas that can survive 2-3 weeks in the inundated conditions. But problem is happening is a repeated flooding. So how it will cope? This is the challenging. But in some areas, this variety is performing very well. And so now we are also introduced the floating seed bed. Actually, earlier, the farmers, they prepared the seed bed, the high level. If it is not available in these areas, they go for the neighboring farmer or the relatives. But nowadays, the flood is also happening in the June. So they are also thought that they need to the alternatives. So that's why the floating seed bed in the northern areas going to the popular. After that, we are also using this bed for the vegetable growth, and this way farmers in the, particularly the rice farmers, they are trying to address this issue. On the other hand, the groundwater is a problem, because the Bodo rice cultivation and in these areas is also going up. And they are also completely depends on the underground water. They have the limited surface water in the facilities in the northern areas. And nowadays, the government is taking initiative to the canal developments from the water development boards, BMDA, but it's a very few. So it's a good option to promote the AWD. Is a very good technology. He has also contribution the methane emission, and it's a clearly mentioned this technology and this. And so we are very closely working with the deep tube and shallow tube owners. But this technology is a collective, the cooperative and community-led approach is needed. The individual is not workable because our water pricing issue is there, and that's why we working with this, the shallow tube and deep tube owner, also the water user. So they clearly understand that the AWD is saving the water. So shallow tube owner realized that we need to reduce the charge of the money. So, and the couple of years, the DAE, we were working with also the Upazila Irrigation Committee, and we are getting the support from them. And on the other issues is a vegetable production in the, particularly the monsoon is a big issues. Now the winter season, we have a huge vegetables, particularly in the monsoon period, is a very difficult to grow. In the shoreland areas is a very tough. So that's why we introduce is the sack gardening for the poor people, because we are mostly working with the landless marginal farmers. So where this technology is, sack gardening is just a gunny bag or plastic bag, put the soil and also the seed, he can replace and shift it during the flood times, and also some areas of tower gardening. So sack gardening and tower gardening in the flood prone areas is becoming very popular, and we are very closely working with the DAE. And also we introduced this, the goat rearing and the selected housing, because particularly the winter winter period, so disease of the goat is increased. So this technology also becoming popular. So another things we are very closely working with the CIMIT and body to promote the conservation agriculture. So no need to more plowing, and we're trying to reducing the plowing, and also mechanizations to raise bed, which can control the irrigation and labor. So and governments is allowing the more subsidies for the mechanization. So we're trying to link with this mechanization program and also the conservation agriculture program. So people thought that the many plowing and tillage is needed to grow the more crop. We are trying to build the awareness of the farmers. And this technology also going a very good number of farmers already adopt these areas. So, and I think that particularly is a issue is one is the lack of knowledge. Still we need the adaptations, we have a limitations, and we need to is a context specific, but we need to learn from the other areas. So knowledge exchange and new knowledge buildings is the issue to work in the particular areas. And a community, actually the community, they are paying more, and they are the so their capacity building, their support to need, because they are fighting with these natural calamities and disasters. So how we can support the communities to build their resilience, and particularly the Union Parishad. So we are working very closely with the Union Parishad, particularly UDMC, to their fund mobilization to allocate some money to support these communities. And some programs in the government programs, they are allowing to allocate some money to work for the communities. We are hopeful to a coordinated approach to the institutions who are responsible for these climate and disaster issues. If we work together, and we will build the capacity of the community and giving the support continuously from the new learning, from the new experience, and we can adjust, we can cope with this situation. But we need to work with also the mitigation issues. We have a good number of the mitigations options. AWD is one of them. And also the composting, where you see using the the lot of chemical fertilizers, but we have a opportunity to produce the compost from the waste, also the cow dung, and also the another degradable items. So need to encourage the farmers to use the more compost. And if you use the chemical fertilizer, you have to think about the follow the recommended dose. Mostly we ignore. Farmers used to nitrogen, particularly urea, So and also in the livestock sector, still working from the improve the breeding system. Government is providing the support, the AI support, and so new breed, and also the breed improvement center. So I think the policy and government wisdom is fantastic, but we work together. And so we need to support the communities, because the community actually, they're the victim. They are the paying more, and due to the climate changing. So this is the summary. This is my field experience. So again, thanks to PRI to allow me to share my field experience. So I'm happy to learn from this webinar, and I bring to this learning from the communities, those who are mostly sufferer due to the climate change.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mamunur Rashid, for sharing with us the practical experience of mobilizing community in the new methods of cultivation that you've been guiding the community in the northwestern part of Bangladesh. And I'm sure many of these innovative methods will gain currency at the community level. And that's a great experience. And thank you for sharing your story with us. This is what we were looking forward to. So thank you very much. I think we now have a bit of time to open the floor for some questions. I have received a lot of queries from through the chat mechanism. But if anybody is prepared and ready to raise a question, you can please unmute and then you can raise that question. If not, I will search for some questions from the text that I've received. But anybody wants to come up with a question, please go ahead. If nobody's asking, here is a question from Mr. Hasibur Rahman of Kodak. He says, to deal with adversities due to climate change, a country like Bangladesh must need to develop capacity and obviously need to have adaptive or mitigative technology. And I think capacity development is linked with institutional challenge that we must address now, since Bangladesh is soon going to graduate from the LDC. So this is an observation, not necessarily a question.
So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Thank you, sir. So this is Dr. Shamsul, Superintendent Engineer from Bangladesh Water Development Board.
Oh, good.
Okay, I, on behalf of our Director General, now I am
Yes.
presenting here.
Please.
So first, I would like to give my thanks to organizer for to become a part of this program. And as you know, Bangladesh is most vulnerable country, and on the other hand, Bangladesh is also champion of the disaster management, as we mentioned in the presentation. So as you know, water sector is the most vulnerable, we always say. And Bangladesh water development, working with water sector since maybe 1959, I mean more than 62 years. We have the experience in water resources. And you know, we have more than 900 projects and more than 16,000 infrastructure. And most of the infrastructure in our coastal area. So where the climate change affecting more and more. So today's presentation is regarding our preparation, especially preparation, institutional preparation against climate change or to combat the climate change. As you know, from the donor-funded projects or development funders, we are implementing so many projects in the coastal area, like CEIP, Coastal Embankment Improvement Project, phase 1, and we also doing the feasibility study for phase 2, and we have also global program, also Southwest Integrated Water Resource Management Project. We have also CDSP, or Development and Settlement Project. So many projects are now we are implementing in the coastal area. And we have the guidelines, so many guidelines, you know, Water Act, water rules. We have the National Water Policy, National Water Management Plan. So in that case, I think our institutional framework or government is well enough. But the problem is, as you know, so yeah, we have, as I mentioned, we have the more than 5,000 kilometer infrastructure in the coastal area. And the problem is that, so if we are now planning to upgrade or resilience the structure against climate change. So when we are going for the resilience, then what we are observing that our costs are increasing 2 or 3-fold and sometimes more than enough. So one of the problems is that the financing is one of the problems, as you know. And another is that O&M activities, so which is also less, I think 1/10 of our requirement. So I think in that case, we also know the constraint of our government. So in that case, maybe some, I see climate finance is very important for us. And then one of the problems is maybe we have also, you know, Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100, and we have the 8 5-year plan, from where we have the 46 investment program in the 8 5-year plan. And out of 46, we have the 33 investment program, which will be implemented during the next 5 years by BWD. So there is a huge resource gap here. So in that case, I think especially climate financing is very important. But the problem is what is the most challenge is institutional challenge. So our knowledge, the knowledge is very, if we go for the, as I mentioned, that global climate, green climate fund. So then what we have observed that, so we have the lack of knowledge, especially making proposal or other things, or lack of maybe linkage with climate knowledge, lack of knowledge with climate, and so many, lack we have. So as mentioned, some of our designated panelists that we need the capacity development. So that is very important for us. So special emphasis from BWDB. So please consider that this issue, the capacity development. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. As a representative from the Bangladesh Water Development Board, you've given us a lot of information. There's what you're telling us, a lot of projects of the Water Development Board that are currently addressing the climate change issue. And we are thankful for you for sharing this information with us. I have a question from Professor Hilal Ahmed of, I think, North-South University. And the question is, I think this might be addressed by Dr. Hassan Moinuddin and Mr. Mirza Shaukat Ali from the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change may also like to chip in. He says, if waste management is the low-hanging fruit in terms of managing our GHG emissions, I would like to suggest agriculture and land use change to be a win-win option. Mitigation, in addition to coping and adapting to climate change. For example, intermittent irrigation, reduced use of fertilizer, crop rotation, and soil carbon management. These are very technical terms. He says will contribute to reduce cost and increased yield. Can anybody address that? Dr. Moinuddin or Mr. Shaukat Ali, do you think you would like to address this question on this managing GHG emission?
Yeah, I agree fully with the suggestions. If Mr. Shaukat Ali has any important information, I'll gladly yield. Just one point, the NDC 2021 update that was submitted last year has given unconditional targets that are to be achieved by GOB on livestock, that is reducing emissions from livestock as well as reducing emissions from agriculture, mainly cropping. So over to you, Dr. Mirza Shaukat Ali, if you would like to say something.
Mr. Shaukat Ali.
Thank you very much. When we submitted our initial national communication in 2015, we covered only energy sector. Energy means power, industry, and transport. But when we updated our NDC, we included all the sectors, including agriculture, land use, and forestry. And methane emission was considered under this waste sector and also agriculture sector. But as you understand, methane emission reduction is a challenging issue because it relates to our food security. So it is very difficult to actually incorporate methane emission. Already under COP26, there is a decision that there is a methane place that 30% of methane will be reduced by 2030 by all the member countries who will place under the methane emission reduction. But we have a challenge from our agriculture ministry. They say we have some sort of national interest here. So we are very cautious to incorporate methane emission, but certainly we have incorporated some issues like alternate wetting and drying process with Department of Agriculture Extension. And we are also working with livestock sector so that the methane emission can be reduced from livestock, especially from manure management. And also there is initial discussion of reducing methane from this cattle feed, where developing a feed specific can reduce methane emission from enteric fermentation and also from the manure. So there are some activities, but I don't know whether I have understood your question rightly, but this is my response. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Now you said, well, although methane emission is a problem, but we've got a food security issue, so we can't just rush into it without making sure that food security is not harmed. So I think that's a good point. But I'm sure
in 30 seconds, sir, I want to add one point.
Yes. Okay.
There is a report from international newspaper that there is a huge emission of methane from our 2 landfill sites. So we have already convened a project with West Concern, and hopefully within a month we are going to get this report, and we will work with city corporation, both the city corporations. There is a committee constituted by our minister, honorable minister, and we will try to mitigate emission from these two landfill sites. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. So that's a very important information. Yes, we also saw this huge report about the methane emission from a concentrated somewhere near Dhaka. So I'm glad, I think, to hear the news that the government has been on it, and the minister has been, addressing this problem right away. Any others? I see some. Dr. Abdul Majid has raised his hand. So please, Dr. Majid, please give your intervention, please.
Thank you.
Former chairman of
yes. First of all, I would like to congratulate the PRI for holding this type of well-organized and with the right representatives of the sector. I have only one small observation. The observation is like this, that we are talking about the effect of something, the climate changes and the problems, but we are not looking at the causes of the effect. So there is a cause and effect. So we are always busy. We have done so many things, how to mitigate the effect. But what we are doing about the withholding the causes that can create this type of climatic problems and etc. So I would like to, I'm sure also that our government is also bifurcating some funds for that, how we can mitigate the causes or stop the causes that can create the climatic problems and etc. When we are crying for making our trees and our natural heritages to be intact, so that we can have less climatic effects. Then at the same time, we are doing some projects or something that can give us a very bad impact over the situation. So I would like to draw the attention that while the government is looking or focusing on the effect on the curbing the effects, then it should also give some attention to hold back the causes that can create these problems. They very recently, 2 days ago, the city corporation has issued another instruction that even if you cut your own tree, you will have to take permission from them. I think this is a good instruction, but the question is who will implement it and how it will be implemented, whether it will create another of non-tariff barrier of type of something in the society. That is a very problem. And when our electric lights are, our traffic lights are on, then the manual trafficking is there and the traffic congestion is being created. So who will mitigate all these things? So that is the important point. That's all.
Thank you. I think I see Mr. Lutfur Rahman, Additional Chief Engineer, Local Government, LGED, Local Government Engineering Division. Mr. Lutfur Rahman, are you there? You want
Yes,
to?
I am here.
Please,
So,
please go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
please?
yes.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I like to say something about the LGD's intervention in the climate change arena. Basically, LGD has been dealing with the climate change issues for last 1 decade. And by this time, project-wise, we have implemented a lot of projects exclusively dealing with the climate change. But later on, we thought that actually to deal with the climate change, the project level initiative is not at all enough. That's why with this concept, we have established a permanent center at the LGD headquarters named as Climate Resilient Local Infrastructure Center. This center is currently funded by Green Climate Fund and KfW, but eventually this center will be converted into the revenue system. That was the thought and that was the plan. That's why, so that we can deal with the climate change issue institutionally. Basically, our center is will develop a dedicated knowledge management system, which will include the database, and this database will be used for the design and planning, maintenance, all issues. And secondly, we have taken initiative to revise all the construction guidelines, specifications, and directives. Whatever we did in the past, we are now just exercising the gaps, that where we need to intervene, where we need to mainstreaming. And in that way, actually, we will mainstreaming all the documents so that in the future, we can deal with the climate change issues. And thirdly, we have taken up a lot of capacity building program, because to enhance the knowledge level of our engineers so that they can also deal with the climate change issues at the local level. So this is very, in brief, I am saying. So hopefully this center actually is one of the center government is targeting under 8 5-year plan, because government at the public sector level, they have planned to establish 30 similar kind of centers in the public sectors. So already this is one of the centers. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, and good to know that LGED has been addressing climate change issues for the past 10 years. So that's a very good piece of information. I think that that concludes our floor discussion, and in the interest of time, I think we have to move on. Unless Dr. Moinuddin, you have anything to say at this point before I move on to our
no, thank you.
Our practice
Dr.
manager.
Please move on.
World Bank. Yeah. Okay, good. So that allows invite Mr. Hoon Saheb So, practice manager of the World Bank for macroeconomics, trade, investment, and the public sector governance, of course. And that is an area in which I also work a lot. So Mr. So, the floor is yours, and we are eager to hear your message.
So I believe I have about 10 minutes.
Yes.
So I'll try to keep my comments short. Of course, I first want to mention the Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Shamsul Alam, Minister of State for Planning, and you, Mr. Chair, Dr. Zaidi Sattar, Chairperson of PRI, and honorable guest. I'm very honored to be here. Very welcome this opportunity to participate in this important workshop.
You're freezing it.
No, wonderful.
We can't hear you. Can you unmute? You just.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
So let me start again. I wanted to thank Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Shamsul Alam, Minister of State for Planning. Of course, also the chair of this meeting, Dr. Zaidi Sattar, chairperson of PRI and honorable guest. Very happy to be here. This has been an excellent workshop, very good presentation by PRI and very good discussions. I prepared a very short speech, but I think I'll go off script. I think it'll be more informative if I just kind of reacted to the presentation and the various comments we heard.
Please feel free.
Okay, so I think it's just some general observations. I think what's clear from the discussions is that we cannot look at climate change in isolation because it's so much integrated with various other issues. And what I've observed is many discussants mentioned actually pollution issues for Bangladesh and the integration or the linkages between climate change issues and pollution issues. So I think when we think about how to address climate change, we need to look at it in terms of the interlinkages and impact on pollution as well. And I might add that that's a way to build public support and consensus on the climate change agenda, because I work on many other countries, and what I find is that getting consensus and support from the public on reforms and investments that directly impacts them by reducing pollution is quite often an effective way to build support for the agenda. The other, in terms of integration, I think it's also important to look at climate change together with overall development and the interplay between climate issues and growth issues, development issues. So I think, again, it's a case where you can't look at climate change in isolation. So when you look at climate change as a development agenda, you quickly can think about growth agenda as well, so green growth agenda. So I think it's important to approach climate change agenda in terms of the country's overall development agenda. And the balance between mitigation and adaptation in terms of its interplay and impact on growth will be important. The balance between policy reforms and investments. I find oftentimes we focus too much on investments and how big the investment gap is, and not sufficiently on policy reforms. And then integrating, we heard from many discussants on very specific sectoral issues, but how do you integrate sectoral issues into an overall sort of development/climate change strategy? I think that'll be quite important for Bangladesh and many other countries. And when we think about development and growth, again, what we heard from many speakers and discussants is the importance of technology. So I want to speak a little bit more about that later as well. So green technology and how do you promote that is, I think, quite important. So, should I try to wrap up?
No, continue.
Oh, okay. So we spoke a little bit about, we heard a little bit about discussions about the importance of having a climate change act or a climate change law. I think there are pros and cons to that, but I think one of the pros is actually how you go about developing a climate change act. So what's important, I think, is using that act as a platform, again, to build awareness and consensus in society. So how you go about developing that act, I think, will be almost as important as what you actually have in the act. And the pros, one of the pros of having a climate change act is it allows you to have a very long-term perspective, right? Because oftentimes development plans are 5-year cycles, just as in Bangladesh. And you can complement that with an act that has a longer time horizon and having very specific goals and interim targets. I think what's important when you have such an act is how do you implement it? And one of the most important things is to make sure that it's mainstreamed into the government's budgeting process. So into budget planning, implementation, execution, and monitoring and evaluation. So that's very important. One aspect I think that's quite important in terms of budgeting is public infrastructure investments. The bank actually has been working with the government to analyze what we call infrastructure governance. So how public infrastructure investments are handled in terms of the institution and governance arrangements around that. I think that's quite important. When we think about infrastructure governance, it's an opportunity for us to link that with the climate change agenda by thinking about how do you green a public infrastructure investment and the management of that. We also heard from a speaker about the importance of the linkages to local governments. So when you talk about mainstreaming the climate agenda into the government budgeting process, it's obviously important that you mainstream it at different levels of the government, make sure there's a linkage between the central and the local. And then finally, in terms of the government process, I think what's quite important is ensuring transparency and accountability and information, access to information. Again, that's important to raising awareness, which I think we've heard from many speakers. So how do you make sure that the public and frankly, government policymakers have access to good climate information? And that'll be quite important for transparency and accountability. So let me finish up by the last comment. We heard an example of Sweden, and I'm from Korea, so I thought maybe I could talk a little bit about Korea's example. I know Korea is not a developing countries, but as many of you know, Korea very recently was a developing country, and it succeeded in making that transition to a high income country. So I think maybe compared to other advanced high income countries, there's something that is closer in experience to Bangladesh and something to look forward to. So I think what's interesting about Korea's case and how it thinks about the green agenda is it really focuses on the growth potential of green strategy. So Korea has a post-pandemic development green strategy. Actually, it's not green, it's a post-pandemic recovery strategy called, has two parts, Green New Deal, with an overarching theme on strengthening employment and social safety nets. And I think that's important, that last part, because it's important when you think about climate change that you have an emphasis on protecting the poor and vulnerable who are most often most exposed and least able to protect themselves to climate change. So the New Deal will invest $144 billion, create up to 2 million jobs up to 2025. And it's called the New Deal because some of you may know the former US President Franklin D. Roosevelt, he had a New Deal, and it was a New Deal to recover from the Great Depression in the US. This was in the 1940s. The Great Depressions were in the 1930s. So like that, this New Deal takes a very much a whole of society approach, and it private sector. So it really emphasizes public and private sector partnership. And third, it really is in some sense a green growth strategy. So it doesn't focus so much on managing the risk from climate change, which is important, but it actually has an approach which I think is a little something that maybe Bangladesh can consider. It very much focuses on taking the opportunities of, let's say, using green technology. And some of you may know that Korea is very much a technology-driven economy now. I mean, when you think of Korea, you can think of Samsung, for instance, of Hyundai Motor Vehicles and so on. So it very much focuses on technology, promoting green technology. So the government's role in supporting research and development, it has a list of projects that the government will support, for instance, on renewable energy, on green infrastructure, green industries, and green mobility. It emphasizes regional development. Up to half of the budget will go outside of the capital city. So there's a very strong regional development. And there's, again, a very, very strong emphasis. Essentially, it's a national green growth strategy. So I think, let me just stop here and just say that the World Bank is ready to support Bangladesh in developing its approach to green growth and the broader climate change agenda. We look forward to working with the government and also with PRI in concluding the CCIA exercise. And we're here to support the government if the government wants to also learn from other countries such as Korea or Sweden or other countries and how to think about its approach to addressing climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our profound gratitude to you, sir, for sharing your ideas, particularly ideas, the example of Korea, which is one country that Bangladesh looks forward to. It is one country which went from a poor, low-income country and in 50 years became a high-income country. That's a record. So Korea's example is worthwhile, and particularly now that you point out that you can be green and you can grow. So you have this strategy of being green and growing, because there are lots of opportunities that growth generates, and it can also be green and addressing all the climate change issues. And this is ideal for Bangladesh at this stage, which it is growing fast, and therefore it's very important that it puts a brake on unnecessary emissions, and adopting these new green technologies. And our leading sector governments, they've said they are already on it. So these are the good news for Bangladesh. Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your ideas. Now I think it's a real good time now, with all the good news that we've heard, to pass the baton on to a good friend and our patron, I would say, good friend, Dr. Shamsul Alam, State Minister for Planning, for sharing his ideas and his views. He's been long associated with Sustainable Development Growth, SDG, of the UN. Now SDG and climate change are interrelated. So please share your ideas, thoughts, and views with us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jayadi Sattar. It's a really very enjoying and informative discussion we have had this morning, and I thank distinguished panel of discussants, participants, and media, we have good introductory remarks from Dr. Hassan Mansoor, from you yourself. So I personally was quite pleased to be with you, because this is really an in-depth discussion on climate change issues, where we are in terms of government steps and actions taken so far, and how those who are working in the field, how they handle climate change issues, how they are helping, improving climate impact issues. So I thank again for inviting me to be with you and to be part of this discussion. Dr. Hassan Mansoor already talked about impact of the climate change in his introductory remarks. He said migration has been going on from southern areas because of adverse climate impacts there, in terms of sea level rise, in terms of cyclones, all this. And he also narrated government commitments on these issues also. Climate change impacts actually what government has been doing in terms of mitigation and adaptation. He reported in his very short introductory speech. And also he explained challenges of institutional functioning dealing with climate issues. Dr. Sattar, you are very, how I say it, very knowledgeable person, speak very succinctly, and you provide information that Bangladesh contribution on GHG emissions only 2.5% of our global emission. That we learned from you, and we have target for attaining zero emission by 2050, and we have nationally determined contribution what we have by 2021. You narrated mitigation challenges and how we have to face adaptation challenges. You talked about BTP 2100 as to address climate change adverse issues, and the role of private and public sectors, national and subnational level, those who must be involved. you actually picked up those issues from the keynote presenter, I believe, as I heard later on. Mr. Abbas Jah, World Bank, he reported that Bangladesh is one of the risk-prone country, risk hazard country out of 10 most vulnerable countries in the world that we already know. And he also said that he admitted that Bangladesh cyclone preparedness and disaster management efficacy is well acclaimed, and we stand out in the world community as we efficiently can handle disaster issues, disaster management issues in Bangladesh. That's quite heartening to know. And he recommended also, Mr. Jha, which I noted, every ministry has to think how they will handle climate impacts while they go with development interventions. So very much correct. We have national plan, we have strategies, what we will be doing, we stated there. But ministries will come up with their own action plan for development, as well as how they will handle climate change issues. And it is quite assuring, as he said. And Dr. Jadis Satta also reported that job opportunity will be created by adopting new technologies, which are climate friendly. So that will create jobs. After your introductory remarks, I enjoyed quite Dr. Hassan Moinuddin's presentation. It's a quite elaborate and focused presentation. And it's really something clearly have demonstrated that what has been Bangladesh doing and what we should do, the national level, at the sub-national level, and what government should do, what NGOs should do. So it's a quite comprehensive but very succinct presentation. He let us know that what regulatory steps Bangladesh has taken. Of that, one is Renewable Energy Policy 2008 and Climate Change Act, Trust Act 2010, Country Action Plan for Clean Cookstoves in 2030, National Action Plan for Reducing Short-Lived Climate Pollutants in 2014. He also referred to about Mujib Climate Prospective Plan. All these are regulatory steps that Bangladesh government has taken. And he referred to the internationally determined contribution of 2050, the NDC roadmap of 2018, the interim NDC of 2020, and the most recently submitted NDC of National Determined Contribution of 2021, and build up a consistent framework of targets and commitments to reducing global emissions. He proposed for climate change, adoption of Climate Change Act that need to be taken up. Climate change related commitments have been made under UNFCCC, and government of Bangladesh has set policy priorities. However, a National Climate Change Act will provide a legal basis for climate resilient practices and action in the areas of adaptation and mitigation, as he suggested. That is quite, I think, he identified the gap at the present in terms of climate law or act we need to have. And he stated we have budgetary support to climate change issues, about in 2020, fiscal 2020, out of 58.11% of total national budget against the 25 ministries divisions, 7.8% were climate relevant, reflecting 0.8% of GDP. Of 25 ministries, agencies are receiving budgetary allocation that are for implementing climate relevant activities. Only 0.77% of total allocation to the road transport and highway division is climate relevant allocation. And LGD, the largest ministry in implementing development budget, has only 7% of total budget dedicated to climate relevant activities. Certainly all these are revealing, and we need to know in detail actually which ministry is spending how much to climate change. In terms of planning, supporting climate change issues, countries need to go beyond the 5-year NDC cycles and think long-term in order to fulfill the Paris Agreement on climate change. And he suggested also GOB at the national level, as he reported, as national level embraced SDGs as its development framework in 2015. And SDGs actually we also integrated in our 8th 5-year plan, as we did in the 7th 5-year plan. So we'll attain SDG targets through implementation of our national planning tool, 5-year planning. And he reported prepared country investment plan for environment, forestry, and climate change in 2017. Roadmap and action plan for implementing Bangladesh NDC in 2018, transport, power, industry sector, and the Bangladesh Delta Plan 2100 in 2018. In terms of long-term planning, he referred to about Bangladesh Delta Plan and referred to very, correctly, the Delta Plan was formulated to address climate change issues in the long term, as climate change is a long-term issue, long-term phenomenon. So we need to address long-term issue by having long-term plan. He reported that we spend only 0.8% of GDP on Delta management projects. Actually, we have one study in GED we found lastly, just a couple of months ago, that we spend 0.95% of GDP and the projects and programs of Delta Plan. Of course, we said in the Delta Plan that this will need to be more than triple of what we had been while we prepared the Delta Plan. At that time, it was 0.5% of GDP, as I remember. So it should be triple to or more, up to 2.5% of GDP. If 80 projects of the plan, as we suggested in the investment part of the Delta Plan. We have medium-term plan and developing a sound environment and climate change financing strategy requires investments estimated at around 4.5% of GDP. That's, I think, empirical estimation. At present, only 1% of GDP is utilized to ensure full integration of environmental protection with the growth strategy. Bangladesh is also under the process of updating the BCC Sap. Actually, this was prepared in 2009. It is, I think, a long due that we need to update it, revise it. So Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change, we would urge they should come up as early as possible with the revised BCC Sap. Actually, we wanted it before we prepared the 8th 5-year plan to reflect the actions there in the 8th 5-year plan. But somehow or other, we have not had it while we prepared the Bangladesh Delta Plan, Bangladesh 8th 5-year plan. I fully agree, as of the keynote presenter, that as per BCC Sap, the divisions should ensure that the projects are designed in line with the thematic areas, objectives set out in the NAPA, the 5-year plan, Prospective Plan, Bangladesh Delta Plan, Bangladesh Climate Change, Gender Action Plan. Dr. Hassan also reported climate policies and strategies have been included in the budget circular under medium-term budgetary framework, MTBF. The two important policy documents where climate change dimension has been included in the medium-term macroeconomic policy statement, what is called MTMPS, and Bangladesh Economic Review. This is taken from Bangladesh Economic Review 2020. It is revealing that new climate financing budgetary spending accounts for 7 to 8% of annual budgets, with roughly 25% coming from ODS sources, and 58 million people have benefited under the scheme of financial year 2019-20. Step has been taken to public finance tracking, as it was reported by the presenter. And he said, climate relevance has been aligned with the thematic areas of the program of Bcc Sap, the old document, I should say it again. Anyway, we need to update it. All targeted climate projects have been considered 100% climate relevant that need to be. Statistical methods have been used to establish a representative relevance weight for the non-targeted project programs. Both development and operating budgets should be considered. The recommendations to be considered with priority, I think, as the presenter said, I fully agree. Forming a vertical link between national line ministries and the Union Parishads, reflecting climate-related activities in Upazila, in Union Parishad budgets, having a sub-budget code for the UPs, tracking expenditure on Union Parishad level. Actually, by act and rules, every Union Parishad and even Upazila need to prepare annual budget and 5-year plan. So this will enhance, or they will help UP's tracking expenditure if they have budgetary code. Skills upgrading and functional literacy, updating to operate new technologies. Research and development in renewables, Internet of Things based smart agriculture and small cities and other green economy sectors, exploiting growth opportunities. Climate change risk and policy objectives have not been mainstreamed across core infrastructure governance process that need to be done. Ways and methods need to be developed for this. Certainly, this is valuable suggestion. Sustainable public procurement needs a prominent place in the public procurement legislation and practices. OECD guidelines for green procurement. Bidders should be required to comply with environmental regulations in order to be eligible for contract awards. So we can take up this and go with introducing in the public procurement policy documents. On climate finance, Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund, BCC TF Trust Fund, has undertaken 800 projects with an investment of $447 million to implement Bcc Sap. It was said in that way. Out of $97 million for climate resilient infrastructure, $40 million has come from the GCF, with further $50 million of co-financing from KfW of German Development Fund, and $42 million from Bangladesh government. I fully agree that carbon taxes can potentially raise substantial amounts of revenue. This was also we put in our 8-5-year plan and said this, that we need to have green tax system in our country. The promise of 100 billion a year climate fund offered by developed economies at the Copenhagen summit 20 years ago did not materialize, falling short by roughly 20% area. That was given, before we had MDGs. And the same promise was given while we had SDGs. We just want to say, promises given, promises should be kept as shared responsibility. I agree very much with the keynote presenter. It is important for SOEs, state-owned enterprises like BPDB, Bangladesh Power Development Board, BWDB, and BADC to explicitly state climate-relevant vision and mission statements, set goals and targets, include these in the ADPs by them, and expenditure accounts, and link these to national targets. All these are, quite possible and feasible suggestions he forwarded. He also actually had some startling successes narrated in his paper, as revealed in the presentation. We have 135 LEED certified green factories in Bangladesh. Quite heartening to know, certainly. Shreda is also working on using as renewable energy, and we have 3.5% of energy now coming from renewable sources. This I am reporting. We have largest solar home system in Bangladesh. We have green hospital, as I could know from Hassan, Dr. Hassan, as he reported, saying all these positive actions, we should not be complacent, because we have to go a long way to turn our economy a green economy with green growth. Sustainability of growth can only be ensured when we have green economy raising healthy living standard. I think we need to adhere to the well thought out recommendations by PRI while we prepare any next policy document, including BCC, upcoming revised BCC Sap. We should go with climate issues mainstreaming in our budget formulation. We'll be looking forward to PRI to get today's presentation as a published full-blown report. It's quite enlightening, quite informative, and very much implementable suggestions they put forwarded in the presentation. So I enjoyed quite surely, and this has big policy relevance while we talk about climate change issue in Bangladesh. Thank you very much for allowing me to be with you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. And our profound gratitude to you for taking all the time and giving us real, guidance and direction on how to go. Time is of the essence, and I'll take just 1 minute. I'm not going to go into detailed concluding remarks. If I could summarize the discussions and presentations of today, I would say very simply that Bangladesh should continue its high growth experience that it is doing without having to sacrifice its growth. It can still address climate change and be green. So we can be green and we can continue to grow. That is the message we are getting, and particularly the example coming from Korea, which went from a low income, poor country to becoming a high income country in just 50 years, and still continues to be green in in addressing climate change issues. That is an example that Bangladesh can easily follow. PRI has suggested in its presentation that although there's a lot of guidelines that that is coming from the government at the topmost level, it might be still a good idea to have a climate change act to provide teeth to the various plans and programs that the government is setting up. So this is something that might be considered. So that is part of our presentation and discussions today. And I think there is something coming up, the revision of the Bcc Sap, and Dr. Shamsul Alam also mentioned that it would be nice to see the revised Bcc Sap, which Mr. Shaukat Ali tells us that is near. So that is something we can all look forward to. There's also some discussion on a carbon tax or carbon pricing. I think is a subject that Bangladesh should consider as part of the addressing climate change and its strategy for addressing climate change. So I think with all those, very succinct points, there are too many points that were raised, and I can not go into all of them. So with these few words, I think it is time for us to draw the curtain on today's webinar. And thank you for all the participants for taking the time and having the patience. And thank you to all the panelists and our special guests and our chief guest in particular. Thank you so much, all of you. And
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye from PRI. Sorry. Sorry. Bye, Queen.